Speaker. I'm pleased to rise on behalf of New Zealand First to speak to the second reading of the Dairy Industry Amendment Bill. New Zealand First is opposed to this bill, as I hope a majority of New Zealand's dairy farmers will also be. Mr Speaker, this bill is quite possibly the single most important piece of legislation to come before this House in recent times, and it's a shame that its importance has been largely overshadowed by several other of this government's monumental failings. I've been privileged to have been allowed to participate as a non-voting member in the proceedings of the Primary Production Select Committee as this bill has been examined, and I wish to thank the committee members, and particularly the Chairman, Mr Ardern, and the Vice Chairman, Mr O'Connor, for their help and advice in assisting me to understand the workings of the dairy industry and the potential ramifications of some of the aspects of this bill. I also want to thank the committee for demonstrating so clearly how well the Select Committee process can work as a vehicle for promoting collegiality and true consensus politics, even though that may not necessarily be reflected in speeches in this House and the ultimate outcome of the voting process on this bill, Mr Speaker. It is enormously encouraging, Mr Speaker, to see that cross-party discussions can be carried out in the way that they were during the committee's deliberations. It gives me great faith that our parliamentary democracy can work as it is advertised and as being intended. I went into this process thinking I knew a great deal about New Zealand's dairy industry and the place and structure of Fonterra within it, and came away realising that the more I learned, the more I understood, the less I knew. If a person like myself, who has had dealings with many years with farmers, can come to realise that my knowledge of this vital part of our country's economy was not what I thought, then I wonder how much understanding of it the average layperson can have. And further to that, how much understanding the general public may not have with regards to the potential effects this bill may bring to the dairy industry and to New Zealand's entire economy. At the heart of this bill is the authorisation for Fonterra to launch TAF, its Trading Among Farmers scheme. Through TAF, Fonterra proposes a one-off issue of non-voting bonus shares or dry shares to its farmer shareholders, the proceeds of which will create a capital pool which Fonterra can use both as a hedge against the threat of redemption risk and as a fund for growing its offshore and value-added businesses. Fonterra shareholders have already voted in favour of this scheme once already, on the understanding that it would guarantee 100% farmer ownership and control of the cooperative. However, the scheme as it is now proposed is very different from that originally suggested, the key change being the addition of unit securities attached to the dry shares, which can be bought and sold by any investor and not solely by Fonterra's farmer shareholders. The problem with TAF is that TAF, as it is presently proposed, is not what farmers voted on originally. If TAF really was just trading amongst farmers, there would not be a problem. But it is not. TAF is trading including farmers. TAF is TIF. And the trading part of TAF will benefit nobody but the traders. We are told that in order to provide itself with a hedge against the threats posed by redemption risk, Fonterra requires additional capital available. This capital can also be used by Fonterra to grow its brands businesses and its offshore ventures, which are the future for what is an entirely export-oriented organisation. This is well and good. However, redemption risk, we believe, has been overstated, and also not well understood as the reality that the real risk from redemption is not the exit of capital from the co-op, but the exit of milk. Milk is the sole source of wealth and income for Fonterra, Mr Speaker. No matter how it is dressed up, the only way Fonterra can pay its bills is by producing and selling milk, and that milk is valuable. $20 billion in turnover, give or take. $10 billion in revenue, give or take. 95% of it exported, and more than fully a third of all cross-border trade in dairy products globally produced right here in New Zealand by Fonterra's farmer shareholders. 26%, Mr Speaker, more than a quarter of all New Zealand's export earnings are generated by Fonterra's 10,500 suppliers. And we salute them for that, Mr Speaker. New Zealand First salutes New Zealand's dairy farmers. They are small in number, but they are mighty in wealth creation. These are the people who get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and go and stand out in the cold and the wet at the back end of a cow, getting covered in mud and other unmentionable materials, and extracting the white gold that is the single biggest source of this nation's wealth. We want them to succeed, Mr Speaker. New Zealand First wants these people, these private business owners, to succeed and to become wealthy. When they are successful, New Zealand is successful. When farmers have money, they spend it. They spend it into their communities and they spend it into the economy. And we all benefit from that. In my previous employment, Mr Speaker, I sold irrigators, more and more of them to existing and to new dairy farmers. In a past life before that, I sold tractors and farm machinery. Farmers buy these things, and the money they spend stays in circulation in New Zealand. But if the shares in Fonterra and the dividend streams attached to them are owned by foreigners in foreign countries, then that is where the money will go. and all New Zealand will be the poorer for it. And if TAF goes ahead in its present form, that is precisely what will happen. At the moment, there is no real redemption risk, and redemption risk has been overstated and oversold. It has only happened twice in Fonterra's history, both under circumstances of a perfect storm. But if TAF goes ahead, the first thing it will do is create a redemption risk. It will do this because under TAF, share values will rise. They have to rise. They must rise because if they do not, traders will not make a profit, and that is the entire point of a trading scheme. So if TAF goes ahead, as it is proposed, prospective investors will offer to purchase blocks of unit securities by way of tender. Farmer shareholders who wish to avail themselves of the return available will then arrange to purchase dry shares in the co-op, and money paid for these shares will become part of the so-called shareholder fund. The investor will then purchase the unit securities from the fund along with the dividend stream from the shares in question. In order to encourage farmers to make dry shares and thereby unit securities available, investors will offer buy prices in excess of Fonterra's existing share values. This is the only way in which they can ensure that shares will become available. And as that happens, so it will create a risk that some farmers may choose to take the win on increased share values, quit the co-op and take the milk to another processor. At the same time, existing farmers, young farmers, new farmers will find themselves faced with a much greater hurdle in terms of the investment required in order to supply Fonterra, investment which they will have to fund through their own bank borrowing. These things combined contain the potential to create another perfect storm, whereby there is a great incentive for farmers to quit Fonterra and supply their milk to alternative processors, the majority of which are neither cooperatives nor New Zealand owned. And because the sole source of revenue for Fonterra is ultimately milk, as share values rise, so the pressure for dividends to rise will also increase. And because all the money comes ultimately out of that one bucket of milk, the only way in which increased dividends can be funded will be for the farmgate milk price to fall. And so we will have farmers finding themselves in the situation where they have voted in favour of the TAF scheme because they have been assured that TAF will guarantee 100% farmer shareholder ownership and control, but rising share values and a falling milk price will ensure that control rests with the people who set the share values, and that will be the unit security owners, and ownership will rest with the majority shareholders, and they will be the investors as well. And it will not matter that neither dry shares nor unit securities carry voting rights, because economic reality is that financial pressure will dictate how farmers vote on constitutional matters as far as Fonterra is concerned. And they will vote to save their own skins. And who can blame them for that, because I would do the same thing myself. And if that means they vote to lift the cap on the proportion of dry shares which the shareholder fund may hold, or the percentage of shares which any individual shareholder may own, then that is something which will impact immediately and tangibly on the cooperative as a whole and on its ongoing viability. In the Select Committee, Mr McKelvey made the point that Fonterra's dairy farmers have the right to vote themselves back to being peasants if they choose. And they do. They have that right. They're private business people. They're masters of their own destiny. And long may that be the case. But, Mr Speaker, Fonterra exists as a creature of statute. It is allowed to exist as a virtual monopoly in contravention of what would otherwise be laws providing protection against anti-competitive behaviour, because it was recognised by government, by Parliament, a decade ago, that the size and strength of a unified dairy industry would be to the greater good of New Zealand Inc. as a whole. And it has been. The thing that was created, that was allowed to be created by the Dairy Act in 2001, has grown such that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. New Zealand has benefited greatly as a result of Fonterra's size and strength in the international dairy trade and in international markets. New Zealand exports 95% of the dairy we produce, and New Zealand accounts for 35% of all cross-border dairy trade globally. It is a $20 billion industry and the vultures are circling. Wall Street wants a slice of the New Zealand dairy industry, Mr Speaker, and this bill will deliver it to them, unless the farmers of New Zealand see the TAF scheme for what it is and vote it down. TAF is a partial float of Fonterra in all but name, created by virtually the same people who suggested the float in 2007 and rightly rejected by farmers then. I have faith in the farmers of New Zealand, Mr Speaker. I have faith, and I hope they will see the truth of this abomination and shoot it down the way they shot down the fart tax. I hope so, because there is no protection for them in this bill. And if they vote for TAF, they will lose their co-op and New Zealand will lose its dairy industry. They will go back to being peasants, and we will all go with them. It will happen quicker than they can change their board and will not be able to be undone. The farmers of Fonterra have been misled and misinformed, Mr Speaker. The TAF scheme is not what they have been led to believe it is. We have seen what happens to a dairy co-op which opens itself up to outside capital in this way and subsequently becomes demutualised. We've seen it in the example of Kerry Dairies in Ireland. Once we get down this road, there is no going back. This is a terrible bill, Mr Speaker, and New Zealand First is opposed to it in its entirety. Thank you.
A point of order, the Honourable Trevor Mallard. Mr Speaker, I'm taking this before the member does because I know he is a rural member, though I'm not sure of his particular circumstances. Mr Speaker, last time this bill was up, a matter, it was something occurred which caused me some concern, and that was that the honourable member Shane Ahern, sorry, made a declaration at the beginning of a speech around his financial interests in farming matters, and I think to do with dairy farms too. That caused me to do a little bit of research and to look in particular, and I think what is quite important in the House is that we have consistency as to declarations, so we don't have some members declaring and others not making declarations to the House when they're in the same circumstance on the legislation. It caused me to look at Speaker's ruling 76.6, which is one from Mr Speaker Kidd, where it says the fact that an amendment might open a business opportunity for a number of companies in which members have an interest is not a direct financial benefit. Such a business opportunity might or might not eventuate from a particular clause or bill becoming law. That matter is entirely speculative, and the view that I'd like to put to you, sir, is that dairy farmers, with regard this change in Fonterra, are in that situation, that whether there's a financial advantage to them or not is a matter of speculation. But probably the other more long-standing Speaker's ruling, which I think almost certainly applies, is 76.3, a 1956 ruling from volume 310 from Mr Speaker Oram, who I think most, well no, not most members of the House, that would be wrong. Many members of the House have looked at standing orders, and some of the old Speaker's rulings know that he was a wise old owl, and there's quite a few of his there. And what he indicates is that a farmer member does not have a financial interest in a bill to provide for the payment and marketing of dairy produce. And the point that I'd like to, or the submission, well, I'm nearly there. I'm nearly there.
Well, please do come there.
The point that I would like to make is, sir, it is my view that that applies, and therefore members who are farmers should not be declaring, as they enter into a speech here, an interest in the interest of consistency in the Parliament.
Yeah, well, I thank the member for raising the point of order, and the member obviously has done some homework, and we'll find that on pages 75 and 76. There's actually quite a suite. I think in the case of members getting up, there is no specific and direct interest as far as I can see, but if a member wishes to declare that they have, then I think that's up to them on this occasion. I don't see that any of these points of order direct either one way or the other, and I think in the case of Mr Shane Ahern, he made it very clear as he chaired the select committee that he also did. But if in fact this was legislation to demutualise, then that would have a particularly more specific application, and so I'm quite happy to let members make that declaration as they so desire.
That's where we do run into a problem, sir, because the Speaker's ruling 76.3 is actually very clear that a member does not have a financial interest. And my submission to you, and if members declare that they do have a financial interest, when standing orders and Speaker's rulings say that they don't, then that's where we run into problems and we run into inconsistencies.
Well, I think, and I'm going from recollection here, that Mr Ahern said he had an interest in the dairy industry. I don't think he actually linked it to the legislation, and that's why he spoke with some passion about that. And I don't think any member, and I need to check the record, but I was in the chair at that time, I don't believe any member said that they had a particular interest directly relating this bill, but acknowledged an interest in the dairy industry. I think Ian McKelvey.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Given the recent point of order, I'll very quickly take the opportunity to declare my lack of interest in the dairy industry. And at the start of this process, I did have... at the start of this... Mr. Speaker, I've only got a couple of seconds here. At the start of this process, I did have an interest in the dairy industry, Mr. Speaker. I no longer have one as of the 1st of June. I just want to take this opportunity, Mr. Speaker, and I guess it saddens me to think that we had to listen to what I can only think is a scurrilous attack on an industry that served this country amazingly for 100 years by the Green member who spoke earlier. I think it's a shame when we have to put up with that sort of stuff. I accept that we don't all agree with things, but there's no need to attack an industry that served our country in the manner that has. Mr. Speaker, this, surprising as it may seem, is probably the most important piece of legislation that will go through this House in this term of government. When you think of the contribution that this organisation makes to New Zealand, the fact that it is